Hello and welcome to chapter 4 of this series of videos where we look to create a 2D platform game in Unity. So chapter 4 will be a continuation of chapter 3, the previous video, and where we left off from chapter 3 was introducing the player to what sprites are, slicing them inside Unity, and applying it to our player. So now in chapter 4, we will look how we can animate those sprites and make use of them in our game. So now let's take a look at the index for this video. First, we'll be animating the idle, running, and jumping animations. Next, we will understand the animator window. And lastly, will be the results of our animations after applying them to our player. So let's just head to Unity and I will showcase how you can do that.
So for the next part where we will create our animations, we need to first properly set up our player for it. So in our component, let's add an animator. Then let's head to our sprites. So here in our sprites, let's create an animator controller. We're just going to name this player. We'll name that player. Then we can drag it here onto the animator. Right, once that's done, first we going to need to have the animator tab and animation tab. So in order to find that, you just go to window, animation, and both of these are here. You can just click on them. So now let's create our first animation, which will be the idle animation. So let's click on create. Let's name this idle. All right, so once we've created the idle, we make sure you want to have this expanded, and this is where renaming really gets into play so that you know which images are for which, and you won't get confused when navigating through all of your sprites. But we will save that for a different time. So now let's just hit record and let's try this here. This is our first image for our idle animation, followed by our second and the last image. Put that there. So let's stop. Maybe we can play and we can see it. Maybe not. Okay, so I've tweaked it a little bit and it seems that we have made the idle animation a bit better. It seems there's only two images actually for the idle animation because this seems to be the start or where Mega Man starts to run or move. So a simple idle animation is just him blinking, and when we hit play, we can see that it's working. Also hit play on the game just to be sure. And you can see that the idle animation is playing. So now we need to create for when he jumps and when he moves. So now that we've created our three animations, you can see that when you go to the animator component, we can see that idle is our default state, which is good because this is what we want the animation to always have when we're not doing anything or when a level is loaded for the player. So now what we're going to have to do is create a transition from idle to running and from running and backwards. And we'll also do the same for jumping, but let's first prioritize running. So first in the parameter, we need to create a Boolean trigger called, let's say, is running. So if this is true, that means the player is running, and if it's off, that means it is not running. So next, let's make a transition from idle to running. And we're also going to make a transition from running back to idle. Now, the key thing here is we want to remove has exit time. This is so that there the so that the transition between both of these animations does not have a wait time, but rather it will be near instant or snappy. So in some scenarios, it could be useful if you have an exit time, depending on what you want to do with your player. But specifically for this basic sprite sheet, we don't have enough time for it to include an exit arc, so we're just going to turn it off. Now we need a condition for idle to transition to running, so the condition will be is running true. So here we're also going to do the same, but this time it will be false. So now for the code to recognize this, we're just going to head to Visual Studio and we will do more coding in order for the code to recognize whether we aren't moving or we are, so that it will play the idle animation and running animation accordingly. So now I've edited the player movement script, and Unity does a great job in autofilling for what you need in order for the animator to work. So first we need to establish the private animator, and we're just going to name it animator so that it will be easy to be called by. Next, we make a void await here so that we can get the component for the animator. Then we simply set the bool for is running. This will make it true. And essentially what this code does, because we explained previously in getting the input for the horizontal, the values that you are getting are either -1 or 1, depending if you are moving left or right. So if it's not equal to 0, that means the player is moving and it will play the is running animation. But if it is instead equal to 0, then it will just revert back to the idle animation. So to showcase this, I've already edited again the animation. And what you want to make sure, I did not mention this in the exit time, we make the transition duration to 0. Earlier, it was set to 0.25. That's why it looked very awkward, where when we start moving, the Mega Man would still be standing still for 0.25 seconds, then the running animation will start. Same when he stops. So now that we removed it, let's hit play. And you can see that he is moving very smoothly. When we stop, the idle animation plays, and when we start moving left or right, the animation starts to play. So now all that's left is to make an animation for when he is jumping. So let's do that real quickly, and I will cut to when I am finished doing it. So we're back, and I made a few changes to the animator as well as the player movement script. So first, when you select the jumping button here, you want to make a transition from any state into jumping. This is so that whenever you're running or you're in the idle animation, as long as the player clicks the jump button, the jumping animation will play. Another important thing is when you double click it, you want to make sure that loop time is off. This is so that the animation won't be played over and over again while the player is jumping. We only want it to play once. So for this sprite sheet in particular, there seems to be only one um, sprite for when Mega Man is jumping. But regardless, I still made a animation clip where I inserted this image. So now we move on to the code, and we needed to make some changes in order for the jump animation to work. So first, we need to know if the player is grounded, since this is where the private bool comes in, and from the parameter is grounded. Now we have to move to the update function where we set the animation for is ground.
So now that we have cleared out our script, we can now play our prototype for the moment, and let's see how the animations look like. So as you can see, the idle animation is working as well as when we are moving left and right. The sprites also flip from left to right depending on where we are facing or what am I clicking. And take note here, in the jump, I am pressing as lightly as possible or how long as possible, just so we can get a feel for how high we can jump with the code we implemented in our script. So that will cover most of the basics for chapter 4 in animating our idle jumping and running. And in the next video, we will take a further look at how we can understand 2D platform game mechanics and physics. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter.